A little bit about me. I'm a dairy calf, and feedlot veterinarian in Southwest Minnesota. I'm originally from Wisconsin, but met a grain farmer in undergrad at Minnesota, and he convinced me to move Southwest Minnesota where the wind does not stop blowing, and found a job at the vet clinic that I'm at now and loved it, love the area. I'm really passionate about cow comfort, animal welfare, and calf care. I have 2 little kiddos at home. Jack, he is a ball of energy. He's 2, and little Miss Madison was born just 4 months ago. So a bit of an agenda for the presentation today. I'm going to talk about stress a lot. High and low risk examples, general considerations. I will touch a little bit on low and high risk protocols, and then an overall conclusion. All right, so I don't know if anyone's familiar with Slido, so if you guys want to whip out your phones, because I know we all have them, this is completely anonymous. Go to slido.com and put in this event code. And we're just going to do a little poll. We're only doing 2 of them the whole presentation. I promise it won't be too much. Give you a couple minutes to, is that event code working? You guys in? All right. If you guys want to pop that up in the back. So the question that should be open is, do you believe you have high risk or low risk cattle at home? And I think there's no idea, and I think I have an unlimited risk tolerance, which I feel like is most farmers kind of have an unlimited risk tolerance. All right, high, low. I like it. All right, we're about 50-50, huh? No idea. Good. It bounces around. Wait another minute or 2. All right, mostly low. Okay. Get back to the PowerPoint, please. So just keep this in mind. We'll have another question later. All right, so now I'm going to talk about overall stress in cattle. It's something I deal with every day as a veterinarian, and you guys probably deal with it every day as producers, whether or not you know it. So stress, the general definition, is any factor that threatens homeostasis or just general stability. So it can be acute or chronic in nature. You know, acute is your fight or flight response. So we have this too. When evolution wanted us to fight off a grizzly bear, there was a sudden release in hormones that can cause an increase in blood flow to your muscles, your heart, and your brain, and all the things you need to either fight off the predator or run. So lots of energy is used during this event, and so it can increase your maintenance, requirements from an energy and protein standpoint. Because of this, if you're using too much of that, you're going to have a loss in production. So milk, if you're a milk cow, calf, or dairy, reproductive performance, and then for the feedlot, reduced growth, efficiency, feed conversion, all of those things will suffer. Typically, an animal will return to homeostasis within 3 to 7 days. So it's a pretty short-lived event. So what is chronic stress? So this is a longer lasting and a slower return to homeostasis or stability. So it can occur when an animal is exposed to multiple stressors, over and over again, or repeat exposure to the same one. I feel like I was in chronic stress all through vet school. It can lead to this overexposure, over-release of these stress-related hormones, which have a pretty big impact on the immune system. And that's what I care about as a veterinarian, okay? The immune system, the ability to fight disease and respond to vaccines. It also can affect the metabolism, digestion, reproductive, are they gonna settle the pregnancy or not? And then of course, growth. And all of these things can lead to increased production costs and efficiencies for your feedlots. So what? Why do we care about stress in cattle? Stressed animals will not respond to vaccines during times of stress. I can promise you that. Their immune system is extremely downregulated when they're stressed because they're not worrying about the disease tomorrow. They're worrying about living today and surviving today. So this can lead to a really poor protection against infectious diseases that you're hoping you have protection for. But another really important thing I think to hit on is that it can lead to the reduced production, like I've been talking about, for feed efficiency gains, cost of gain, everything can lead into a really stressed calf. So there are many stressors that are out there when you think of a feedlot calf or even just a weaned calf. So physiological, so where I'm from, it gets really, really cold in January and it can get really, really hot and muggy in July and August. So we have both swings of that. Transportation, dehydration is a really big deal, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. Environmental conditions, nutritional modifications, and then social changes. I think we forget that cattle are a social creature. They have the pack or the herd mentality, right? And they do establish pecking orders. So this can be a stressor that we don't always think about for our cattle. And all of these things can cause a shift in the metabolism and the use of fat and muscle. So when I think about nutritional stress, a calf with a activated or challenged immune system will have a significant increase in requirements, right? Because it's using all of that energy and protein to have an immune response, okay, to mount an immune response, which costs a lot for them. But on the flip side, if calves are not transitioned correctly and have insufficient intakes, right, like they're only used to seeing mama and pasture, and you bring them in and dump silage in front of them and say good luck, they're going to have a severe immune system depression because they aren't getting the calories they need to have an immune system response. One thing Dr. Curley and our team always says is that the energy needed during a severe immune challenge is equal to the average daily gain of 4.5 pounds a day. So that shows you how much energy is needed to have an immune response. You're hoping that calf is gaining, but if they're really struggling, they're not going to do anything for you. All right, so let's get into high risk and low risk examples, kind of related to the poll that I had you guys get online and poll about. So high risk examples, it's kind of, this is just my personal, opinion on this. Typically multiple source or commingled. When you think of a pen of feedlot cattle, 200 head, right? But the average cow-calf herd is 40 to 50. So you're having 5 groups right there of cattle, or 5 sources commingled. Sale barn grouping, which is my favorite, right, as a veterinarian. You walk in a pen and it's like rainbow colored tags, so you're just, it's going to be a high risk group. Lightweight or early wean, especially during a drought season or when feed costs get too high. Dairy beef crosses, not to call the Holstein feeders to the floor, but there is some debate if those are just always going to be high-risk calves. Minimal backgrounding, minimal or unknown vaccine history, which I think is really common. Intact bulls, long-haul calves. So dehydration, the reason we worry about calves that are dehydrated is if they're dehydrated, the ability for them to take the vaccine that you just put in their neck and get it in their entire circulation so their whole immune system can see it is very hard. So there's a delayed uptake of that vaccine, and then their ability to actually respond to it is difficult. So dehydration is a really important thing to keep in mind. And then harsh weather. Did they go through a snowstorm? Did they get stuck somewhere? What happened to those calves on their way here? So on the flip side of that, low risk examples would pretty much be the exact opposite, right? So single sourced in our dreams, older cattle with a more robust immune system, they've seen a lot, they're mature, backgrounded, extensive vaccine history, they're already dehorned and castrated, they have a short haul or no haul if they're yours, and then plus or minus if they're native beef cattle versus a Holstein influenced calf. But at any time, I think we all can agree that a high-risk calf can perform like a low-risk. That's why we buy them, right? Because we want to hit that home run because we're hoping we can manage them as a high-risk calf and have them perform for us, or a low-risk calf can become a high-risk calf. Okay, now that we've went through those definitions a little bit, let's bring up the Slido again. If you guys can reopen that page, there should be a new poll that they'll get to in a second. If you just wait 1 minute. All right, so now, after that, do you think you have high or low risk calves? Or do you still have an unlimited risk tolerance? Okay. Maybe a little bit more on the lower risk. Who is this unlimited risk tolerance? Bless your veterinarian's heart. Okay. Good deal. Still a little bit more on the low risk. All right, I think we can go back to the presentation. All right, so to gamble or not to gamble, everyone has a different risk tolerance. I'd say farmers in any agriculture sector have a pretty high risk tolerance, but what you think is low risk might be high risk to the next producer or your neighbor. Everyone has different comfort levels with gambling or investment portfolios, so you just kind of have to understand your risk tolerance and what that looks like for you in your feed yard. Keep in mind your limitations, so nutrition, management, environment, labor has been a really big one for us recently, and of course finances. So nutritional limitations for your yard, what feedstuffs do you have on hand or readily available that you grow yourself? Growing season challenges, if it's a really dry year, if you have really bad hail, things that happen during a growing season you can't control. Byproduct sourcing and consistency, depending where you feed, cost to feed. Feeding different cattle than you're used to. If you're used to a solid single source Montana yearling and you decide to put in 200-pound Holsteins, the feed requirements are going to be different. A lot of other things are going to be different, but you can't feed them the same right away. And then properly balanced diets to maximize performance and potential health. So working with your nutritionist to make sure you fine-tuned the feedstuffs you have on hand and how you feed your cattle. Management limitations. So where I practice, we have a lot of, we call them farmer feeders. They're farmers first. They're going to be in a combine and in a planter seat season-wise. So typically they're not going to place a new pen of high-risk cattle right before harvest or right before planting. Time. Do you have time to manage a high-risk group, or do you have time to manage a low-risk group? And then of course expertise. If it's your first go at filling your feed yard, what kind of calves do you want to put in there to set yourself up for success right away? Environmental limitations, so pen space, how many calves are you trying to put on your yard? Pen style, so a bed pack, a slat barn, a yard. You're going to put a very different calf on a slat barn than you would in a nice monoslope bed pack, right? Bunk height and size, I think we forget about this a lot. So making sure you're doing the measurements and seeing, does my bunk fit that smaller calf I'm going to get this year for whatever reason? Same with the water. And then seasons. I feel like in Minnesota we have 9 months of winter, so that's gonna, really change. You're not gonna put a lightweight early wean calf on slats in the middle of January where I live. So things like that to consider. Labor limitations. I feel like everyone feels this post-COVID. Do you have the ability to vaccinate and implant your cattle in a timely manner and walk pens as needed? If you don't, that should influence what type of cattle you get. Expertise of your labor that are helping, and then nutrition. Proper ration mixing, proper bunk reading. Are you going to place a pen of cattle and go snowmobiling for 2 weeks and hope your neighbor kid can figure it out? All those things. are real and need to be considered. Financial limitations. So do you have it penciled in that group to be able to mass med them if you need to? If the high-risk calves you bought that were a really good deal, doc, I just couldn't pass it up. Do you have enough built into it for how you have them marketed to mass med them if you have to? So keeping those in mind. But no matter the risk, an incoming nutrition plan and a transition plan are extremely important for calves. Vaccine considerations, we can't ignore that, as well as environmental limitations depending on your yard and your setup, as well as the labor you have at your disposal. Okay, so next I'm going to go into protocols. Spoiler alert, if you came for the most magical high-risk calf protocol to bring home to your farm, you're not going to get it. So I think there's beer downstairs, so if you want to check out and go enjoy the beer, go for it. But we're just going to go through some basic high-risk and low-risk examples and what different vaccines could be placed for whatever reason. So to start with the immune system, there's kind of two legs of the immune system. So there's the innate immune system, which is the part that we're all born with, all animals are born with, and it's really nonspecific. So it's just there to always be on guard for any kind of bug challenge that you receive, nonspecific defense. The active immune system is the part of the immune system that has an adaptive response. So this is what gets activated during vaccination or a disease challenge. You know, hopefully you get vaccinated when they see the disease, they can actually respond. And it has memory. You know, we're learning in the animal world how much memory some of these vaccinations and immune responses have, but it typically does have some sort of memory. I think we all need to remember that only about 80 to 90% of animals will have an efficient immune response to vaccination, similar with humans. So the whole vaccinate the herd, it's in the hope that if you hit that 85% mark, that you can get herd immunity, and those individuals that don't have an efficient immune response will still be protected because the other 85% is. So killed versus live vaccines, I'm sure you're all familiar with the vaccines that are, you know, ready to go versus the ones you have to mix. So killed vaccines consist of pathogen particles, so a piece of the pathogen or bug, or the pathogen has been completely killed or destroyed. And therefore, it really won't cause an active disease in that calf, right? And typically, a booster is required almost always to maximize the immune response. Now, your modified live vaccines, the one you mix, they're consisted of altered pathogens. So they took that bug and they took out a couple genes or changed a couple things around. So it'll elicit an immune response, but it's not going to make that calf fully sick like the complete normal pathogen would. So why do we booster for our killed vaccines? And I feel like this could, for any vaccine, this is kind of why we like to booster, right? Because you hope the more they see it, the better immune response they have without going overboard. But you can see the first vaccination, you have that little hill for the antibody response. The second, and then, you know, a little bit of time passes and they actually get the disease challenge and they have a really good immune response and an increased memory. So they're able to fight off that disease when they see it. So intranasal versus injectable vaccines are pretty important for high or low risk protocols. Some examples that are out there would be Enforce, Nasal 3, TSV2. For injectable 5-way vaccines, that's your Bovishield, Vista, Pyramid. You know, the big difference, and these are just the viral bugs that cause bovine respiratory disease. You know, your intranasal is typically those 3 pathogens, and then your injectable will add in your BVD 1 and 2. So intranasal vaccines are helpful and interesting because they initiate a rapid immune response in the nose, right? That's where you're giving it, you're waking up that immune system to those bugs. Typically not affected by maternal antibodies, that's why we give it to baby calves. And you can also have an increase of a non-specific immune response called interferon. So interferon, again, is part of that innate immune system that just, when you vaccinate them, it shows up and it's just there to fight whatever comes. Injectable vaccines are a good tool, but it does take longer for the immune system to respond. You know, cattle probably aren't fully protected for 10 to 14 days, depending on the vaccine and how many times they've seen it before. Some are affected by maternal antibodies, meaning if that calf is too young, the maternal antibodies that they have on board will kind of cancel out the vaccine and they won't get an immune response. Killed vaccines would need a booster for full protection, kind of like I showed you before. All right, so high-risk protocol. What kind of vaccine history do you have? I think it's fair for high-risk calves that show up with no ear tag and they haven't been castrated. We can probably assume they've never been touched by a human. So the only vaccines that you can count on are the ones you inject yourself. Prophylactic antibiotics, you know, if they're super high risk as an entire group, do we want to mass med them? You know, have you penciled that in for the budget on this pen of cattle to do so? Coccidiostats are extremely important, so making sure the cocci levels are under control. What's hard with high-risk calves is they usually aren't eating enough right away to get a high enough rumensin or Bovatec level, so you might have to treat them with a coccidiostat with a 5-day pulse just to get that going, maybe through the water or a high enough level in the feed. A feed transition plan, working closely with your nutritionist, what it looks like to start those calves. When do you want to introduce silage? When do you want to really start pushing corn? What does that look like? And stocking density, you know, giving them space to live and figure out the pen they just got dumped into is really important. So as I've kind of alluded to this whole talk, right, it's so much more than just vaccines. You know, are you giving them hay for a couple days if they're super high risk, you know, Western calves that have never seen a feed bunk? Extra water source. Calves are going to pace the outside of that pen that you just put them in. And if they can't find that automatic water tank, or they have no idea what it is, how are they going to drink? So adding an extra water tank I found to be beneficial. Minimal handling in the first 24 to 72 hours. There's kind of two camps in the veterinary industry, if you just work them right away or if you let them sit. But I would say keep in mind the hydration status because they're not going to be able to respond if they're not hydrated. You could consider your intranasal versus injectable vaccines here. Again, they're typically a little bit easier on the calves and have a quicker immune response, so the calves are vaccinated quicker. And then mass meds. If you start to have a significant health challenge in calves, you know, a typical result we'll see if you mass med them, you can reduce your deads and culls by about 50%. So depending on what's going on and what you have the cattle penciled out for, this can be beneficial. A low-risk protocol, coccidiostat, again, I think we can never forget that. Vaccination, typically no antibiotic. Again, the low-risk pen of calves can become high-risk pretty quickly. And then nutrition, can you step them up a little bit faster? Are they a little bit bigger, a little bit more sturdy? Can you push them? Have they seen feed longer than a high-risk calf? So in conclusion, there are many factors, like I discussed, that really go into what type of calf you're feeding and can assess the risk level. Stress is a really big deal. Form a team with your veterinarian, your nutritionist, your banker, you know, who is your board of directors for your farm that help make these decisions, and come up with the best possible plan for whatever kind of calves you place. Questions? Yes, hold on. Someone's going to run you a microphone because these lights make me go deaf, I swear.
Two questions.
Okay.
What would be the titer level that would give you full protection? And then the second question is, what about injectable vitamins in the protocols?
Yep.
And if so, if there are some, what would they be?
Sure. So your first question was, what is the titer level?
Yeah, what level, you mentioned your graph.
Yeah.
You know, what titer level are you, if we're doing some testing, what level should that, to get protection, what would that be at?
Oh man, honestly, I'd have to review titer levels for each pathogen because not tons of that is really laid out in the animal industry. Like humans, it obviously is. Like we know tetanus, we have to get every 10 years. I honestly don't know if I can answer that question for you. But I think we know that there is a ramp up in the second vaccine. So when they see it again, they're going to be more protective. And it's just getting that adaptive immune response to see it again.
So the vaccine companies don't have to show that? Don't have to show the titer level for protection?
No, because all of their challenge studies is disease. Like, do they end up getting the disease and then they euthanize them and see what the disease lesions are? I wish that would be something that we could look into. I just think it's too expensive and complicated. I've really only ever looked at titers in practice if I'm trying to see if calves have certain protection from their mom.
I mean, you see where I'm coming from. You
Yeah.
show this graph,
Yep.
but you don't know.
Oh, no. Yeah. There's just that red line we're trying to hit, right?
I mean, it's like,
Yep.
why even talk
What is
about
that?
it if we can't measure it?
Yeah. Nope. I think it's just all off response of disease and how sick they get from it and do they die from it. But yeah. And your second question was on injectable vitamins. Do you mean vitamins or minerals or both?
Just the vitamins.
Vitamins. So vitamin A and E are really beneficial for skin and general immune health. I think vitamin D would be in there too. That is definitely something you can add into a protocol, especially if you're concerned about the levels of those vitamins in your feedstuffs, depending on how stored your feedstuffs are. But those are very acceptable, especially in young calves, I think. And vitamin C can be really helpful in young calves. Yep. Answer your questions. Come catch me after and we can talk about titers more. Yeah, so again, there's kind of two camps about minerals. I come from a unique part of the world where I've actually seen copper toxicity in calves, especially these dairy calves. That mama cow on the dairy was significantly oversupplemented, and then we kept oversupplementing the calf, and that becomes a problem. You can have similar side effects if they get too much mineral or too little mineral, but on our beef cattle, I think there's an opportunity for minerals. I'd work with your veterinarian and honestly look at a soil map and see, where they're coming from if you know what they're deficient in, where they're coming from, or if you feel like you're having a problem, taking a liver sample or liver biopsy is a great way to assess immune status. But in general, adding an injectable mineral on arrival does kind of hold up that immune system response because the immune system pulls a lot of mineral to have a response. So long explanation, but yes, I feel like in high-risk beef cattle it is beneficial. I'd be very careful in any Holstein-influenced calves. What else? I'm losing my voice.
Do you consider when getting calves in whether they're high risk or not, if PI testing's worth it, and what does it show?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't think it's always worth it consistently to check for PIs on your farm. We do have some producers that do because they've had a big enough train wreck. I don't know, is Dr. Dorsey in the room? Probably not. So I think it's 4 out of every 1,000 head of feedlot cattle are born PIs, and then only 2 of them will make it past 500 pounds. There's some statistic out there. But PIs are really only going to be a problem if everybody else there around isn't properly vaccinated, right? So if other calves are properly protected and vaccinated, the PI calf, half of them die because they're not healthy, and the other half are completely normal calves. So it really depends on the vaccine status of everybody. But overall, I don't think it's worth testing everyone on arrival.
Do you think the PI testing came about more strong when we had drought conditions versus regular conditions?
Say that one more time.
Did PI testing come on more strong when we had drought conditions versus just ordinary conditions? We seen a lot more PI when it was coming through the drought stress than if you came through ordinary stress.
Sure, yep. I mean, I've never thought of testing differently that way, but I think that would make sense in drought conditions if finances are tight and people aren't vaccinating their cows like they should, or the extreme movement of cattle that happens in drought, right? Like everyone starts dispersing their cows and we have a lot of mixing. Joe Blow hasn't vaccinated his cows in 10 years and now he's dropping them in a yard. So I do think that'd be something to consider depending on where you source your calves from, because there will be an increase in issues because of the chain effect of a drought, for sure. Yeah, just stress. The cows might not respond to a vaccine even if you give it to them. What else? Any other questions? I'll be around till Thursday. Again, my name's Erika. Feel free to come find me if you have any questions. Go from there. Oh, yep.
Spraying shots are, people that have small groups of cows that are selling calves, or and preconditioning, how important that would be.
Can I just speak to that, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So preconditioning, right, would be making sure that that calf is weaned off of mama, properly vaccinated, processed, so castrated if that hasn't been done yet, dehorned if that hasn't been done yet, and adequately transition on a bunk or some sort of feed besides mama and grass. You really got to do that over a 30-day period if you want to have a solid backgrounded preconditioned calf. There's more cost for that, for the cow-calf guy to do that, more facilities, you need to manage that differently. But I mean, I would much rather obviously have a preconditioned calf that comes into the yard. Where we run into trouble though is a lot of these small herds that, are trying to do the right thing in precondition, but they don't quite do it all the way. So then they're sending this even more stressed calf, and then we're commingling how many together. So you really need 30 days to get all that done and have that calf be stress-free.
Or even fall shots before weaning, is probably what I was leaning more.
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
So any way to separate those stressful events, you're gonna benefit, right? If you can get those vaccines into the calf before the big stressful event of moving to the next feed yard, they're gonna have a better immune response. They'll be better for the feedlot they're going to. Vaccines are important. I'd say I can probably make more difference on a farm through nutrition and nutrition management than I can with vaccines, but you can't forget vaccines. What else? So I'm losing my voice.
Have you seen any benefits with mixing live vaccines and then, say, boostering it with a killed vaccine, co-mingling them at all? Is there any better coverage that way?
Yeah, they're coming out with some of that information where I think it's called prime. I can't even remember the terminology they're coming out with. But yeah, your initial vaccine is a killed and then you follow with a live or vice versa. They're coming out with some data that could be advantageous because you're kind of activating different parts of the immune system because you're presenting the pathogen differently. I don't really have any herds that are consistently doing that protocol. Live is always going to be better than killed for pre-breeding on your cattle, and just as a general cow-calf herd program for better protection, because I've seen some people run into issues with having too many years of a killed program. But that's coming out. I don't have anyone personally doing it, but there's definitely a lot more research being done in that priming effect of different types of vaccines. Anything else? Come find me. Appreciate you guys coming today. Enjoy the rest of the trade show.